Please subscribe and like.
Eleanor Thompson shifted her purse to her other arm, her fingers tightening around the strap. She hated coming to the bank alone, especially in this part of town. Too many things had changed over the years, too many people had changed. Then she saw him. A young black man stood at the ATM, his hood down, hands moving quickly over the keypad. His eyes flicked around the bank, and something about the way he stood made her uneasy. He didn't look like he belonged there. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She had seen enough news reports. She knew how these things started, young men lurking around, pretending to use the ATM, waiting for the right moment. It was always the same. Her mind raced. What if he's scamming the machine? What if he's waiting for someone to walk by so he can snatch their wallet? She glanced at the security guard. Useless. He wasn't even paying attention. The bank tellers were busy, and no one else seemed concerned. They never learn. The young man pressed the buttons faster, his fingers flying over the keypad. That was it. He's up to something. Eleanor took a step forward. Hey! Her voice cut through the low murmur of the bank. What do you think you're doing? The man didn't react at first. She took another step. I said, what are you doing over there? He turned, confusion on his face. What? Her heart pounded. I saw you messing with the machine. I know what you people do. Silence. A few heads turned. A woman at the counter paused her transaction. The security guard straightened up, finally paying attention. The young man's face twisted. You people, he repeated, his voice tight. You know exactly what I mean, Eleanor shot back. Pressing buttons all fast, looking around like you're waiting for someone. You think I don't see what's happening in this country? The man let out a short, humorless laugh. Lady, I'm using the ATM. Eleanor folded her arms. Then why are you acting so nervous? The security guard stepped in. Something wrong here? Yes. Eleanor pointed a shaky finger. He's doing something to the machine. I saw him looking around, acting sneaky. The guard's eyes moved to the young man's face. Then to his hoodie. Then to his hands. His expression shifted. Sir, I'm gonna need to see some ID. The young man's jaw clenched. You've got to be kidding me. You're causing a disturbance, the guard said. Just show me your ID and we can clear this up. Eleanor exhaled, her pulse finally slowing. Finally, someone is listening. The young man looked around, but nobody spoke up. Some watched, some avoided eye contact. He scoffed, reaching into his pocket. This is some real bullshit, he muttered, pulling out his wallet. Eleanor just stood there, waiting. She knew she was right. Or so she thought. The young man held out his wallet, his jaw tight. Here. You want to check my ID? Go ahead. The security guard took it without a word, flipping it open. Eleanor craned her neck, half expecting to see something fake. Malik Carter, the guard read aloud. He examined the ID for a moment before looking up. This yours? Malik clenched his fists. Of course, it's mine. What, you think I stole my own damn ID too? Eleanor scoffed. Wouldn't be the first time. A few gasps echoed from the people nearby. A middle-aged man near the counter shifted uncomfortably, and a woman clutching her purse took a step back. But no one said a word. No one defended him. Malik let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. This is insane. He gestured toward the ATM. Check the machine. My account. The cameras. Do whatever you need to do. But Eleanor wasn't letting it go. People like you always have a way of covering things up. His head snapped toward her. People like me? You know exactly what I mean, she said, her voice dripping with certainty. Every time I turn on the news, there's another robbery, another scam. And it's always Lady, stop, Malik cut in, his voice tight with anger. Just stop. The security guard shifted slightly, but he still held Malik's ID. You don't have any weapons on you, do you? Malik let out a bitter laugh. Are you serious right now? It's just a question, the guard said. Eleanor felt a smug sense of satisfaction. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. Malik's nostrils flared, his chest rising and falling sharply. He reached for his hoodie pockets, then stopped himself. Instead, he slowly raised his arms, palms up. Nothing on me, he said. See? No gun. No knife. Just a black guy trying to use an ATM. Eleanor stiffened. He was trying to play the victim now. Like they always did. All right, the security guard muttered. Let's not make a scene. But it was too late. The entire bank was watching now, some whispering, others just staring. A teller hesitated before calling out, I can check the security footage. The guard nodded, finally stepping back. Yeah, do that. Malik lowered his hands slowly, his face hard. Yeah, go ahead. Maybe then this lady will shut up. Eleanor scoffed. Watch your mouth, boy. Malik flinched. Not because of fear. Because of anger. Because of frustration. Because it didn't matter what he said or did, people like her always saw him the same way. And right now everyone in that bank was watching him, but no one was stepping in. No one was saying, this isn't right. Because to them maybe this was normal. Maybe this was just the way things were. And that realization stung worse than anything Eleanor could say. The bank manager arrived, a tall, middle-aged man in a neatly pressed suit. He glanced at the security guard, then at Malik, before looking over at Eleanor. What's the issue here? Eleanor didn't hesitate. I caught him messing with the ATM, she said firmly. He was pressing the buttons too fast, looking around like he was waiting for something. It was obvious. The manager frowned. Did you see him take anything? I know what I saw, she insisted. People like him, she caught herself, but it was too late. Malik let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. People like me. Yeah, we've heard that before. The manager exhaled, rubbing his temple. Let's check the footage. The teller nodded and tapped a few keys on her computer. A few moments later, a grainy black and white feed popped up on the screen behind the counter. The entire bank could see it. Eleanor folded her arms, waiting to be proven right. But what she saw made her throat go dry. The footage showed Malik walking up to the ATM, pulling out his wallet and calmly inserting his card. No hesitation. No tampering. No quick, suspicious movements. He was just making a deposit. The video zoomed in as he held a stack of bills in his hands before feeding them into the machine. Eleanor blinked. Wait, that's cash. A lot of cash. The teller spoke up. He wasn't withdrawing money. He was depositing it. Silence. Malik crossed his arms. Told you. Eleanor's mind raced. That didn't make sense. Young black men didn't deposit money. They didn't stand at ATMs to put money in. That wasn't how these stories went. The teller continued, according to his account history, he's been making similar deposits regularly. Nothing suspicious at all. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came out. The manager sighed. All right, Mr. Carter. You're free to go. Apologies for the misunderstanding. Malik didn't move. He just stood there, his jaw tight, eyes burning with something deeper than anger. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. He wasn't just angry. He was tired. Misunderstanding. Malik repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He looked around the bank at the faces of people who had either watched silently or assumed the worst. Then he turned to Eleanor. You had no reason to think I was stealing, he said, his voice low but steady. None. I was putting money into my account. My own money. But that didn't matter to you, did it? The second you saw me, you decided I was a criminal. Eleanor's chest felt tight. She wanted to say something to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down she knew he was right. Malik let out a sharp breath. You know why I was making that deposit? Because my mom's in the hospital. I've been working extra shifts to help pay her bills. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. And you? He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. You didn't see a son trying to take care of his mother. You just saw a black guy at an ATM and thought he must be a thief. The weight of his words crushed her. Malik grabbed his wallet and turned to leave. The customers in the bank stayed silent, shifting awkwardly, some glancing at Eleanor, others avoiding her gaze entirely. Eleanor wanted to call out to him, to explain, to say something. But what could she possibly say? As the bank doors swung shut behind him, Eleanor felt the stares. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. The manager muttered something under his breath before walking away. For the first time, Eleanor didn't feel relieved. She felt small. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong all along. Eleanor left the bank in a daze. The moment she stepped outside, the sun felt harsher, the air heavier. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse. She had expected to feel victorious, to feel safe after stopping what she thought was a crime. But instead, she felt ashamed. The memory of Malik's face wouldn't leave her mind, his anger, his exhaustion, the way his voice cracked when he mentioned his mother in the hospital. Her feet carried her down the sidewalk, but she wasn't really walking anywhere. The city noises, car horns, chatter, footsteps blurred into the background. She had spent her entire life trusting her instincts, believing she knew how the world worked. And yet today, she had humiliated an innocent man just because of the color of his skin. No, it wasn't just that, she told herself. He was acting suspicious. He was pressing the buttons too fast. She stopped walking. Those weren't real excuses. They were justifications. Lies she told herself to avoid the ugly truth. She had accused him. She had humiliated him. And everyone in that bank had seen it. Her stomach twisted. How many times has this happened to him before? How many times has someone like me made him feel like a criminal just for existing? A group of young black men walked past her on the sidewalk, laughing at something on a phone. She caught herself tensing up, clutching her purse a little tighter, just like she always did. But now it felt different. Now she noticed it. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to loosen her grip. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt something new. Doubt. Maybe the world wasn't as simple as she had always believed. Maybe the problem wasn't them. Maybe the problem was her. Eleanor barely remembered how she got home. The entire walk back was a blur, her thoughts looping endlessly. By the time she stepped into her quiet house, the weight of the day crashed down on her. She set her purse on the table with trembling hands and sank into her armchair. She turned on the TV, hoping for a distraction. But the moment the screen flickered to life, a news anchor's voice filled the room. Another incident of racial profiling has sparked outrage today. Eleanor flinched. The screen showed security footage of a young black man being detained outside a store, hands raised, fear in his eyes. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Mistaken identity leads to unjust arrest." Eleanor's chest tightened. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't some rare misunderstanding. It was everywhere. She leaned forward, gripping the armrests. The news played an interview with a woman, probably the man's mother. Her voice shook with anger. "My son was just shopping. They thought he was stealing because of the way he looked. Do you know what that does to a person? To always be seen as a threat?" Eleanor swallowed hard. She knew. She had done it. She had been that person. Her fingers clenched into fists. The truth burned inside her, forcing her to see herself clearly for the first time. She had ruined Malik's day. Maybe even more than that. And he would carry that moment with him long after she had gone home and turned on her TV. Her breath felt shallow. She couldn't sit here, couldn't pretend this didn't matter. She had to do something. But what? She had humiliated him in front of an entire bank. An apology wouldn't change that. And yet she had to try. She grabbed her purse and stood up. She needed to find Malik. Eleanor hesitated outside her house, gripping her purse tightly. Finding Malik wouldn't be easy. She didn't know where he lived, didn't know anything about him, except his name. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. What was she even looking for? A phone number? An address? She wasn't sure. But after a few minutes of searching, she found something, an article. Local grocery store employee raises funds for his sick mother's treatment. She clicked on it. A photo of Malik filled the screen. He was standing behind a cash register, smiling at an elderly customer. The article explained how he had been working extra shifts at a small grocery store nearby to help cover his mother's hospital bills. Eleanor's stomach twisted. "I accused a hardworking son of being a thief." Before she could second-guess herself, she grabbed her coat and headed out. The small grocery store was only a few blocks away. When she arrived, the bell above the door jingled, and the scent of fresh produce filled the air. A few customers wandered the aisles, chatting softly. And then, she saw him. Malik stood behind the counter, scanning items for a customer, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She stepped forward, but the moment Malik looked up and saw her, his face darkened, his jaw tensed. He didn't say a word, just stared at her. Eleanor swallowed. This was harder than she expected. "Malik," she started, her voice softer than usual. "Lady, what are you doing here?" he interrupted. His tone was flat, emotionless. Eleanor hesitated, glancing around. She suddenly felt exposed, as if she were the one being judged now. I wanted to talk to you," she said, lowering her voice. Malik exhaled sharply. "About what?" "How I almost robbed the bank." His words were laced with sarcasm, but his eyes held something deeper, hurt. Eleanor's chest tightened. She had expected anger. She deserved anger. But the disappointment in his eyes hurt more than any harsh words could. She took a deep breath. "No, I came to apologize." Malik said nothing. He just stared at her, waiting. Eleanor's hands shook slightly. She had never done this before. Never admitted she was wrong like this. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I looked at you and assumed the worst. Not because of what you were doing, but because of who you are. Because you're black." Malik's lips pressed into a thin line. He said nothing, but his eyes flickered, just for a moment. Eleanor continued, her voice thick. "I humiliated you. In front of everyone. I thought I was protecting people, but I was just being hateful. She swallowed hard. And I'm sorry. Truly. The grocery store felt unbearably quiet. Malik studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath and shook his head. You think an apology fixes that? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor flinched. No, she admitted. It doesn't. Malik leaned on the counter, crossing his arms. Do you know how often this happens to us? How often people like you assume we're criminals? You think I'll just forget it because you feel bad now? Eleanor lowered her gaze. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly. I wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did. And I hate that I did it. Malik studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he exhaled. At least you're honest about it. Eleanor nodded slowly. I want to be better. Malik let out a short, tired laugh. Then prove it. Eleanor met his eyes. How? Malik's gaze was steady. Next time you see someone like me, don't assume the worst. Speak up when you see someone else doing what you did today. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. I will. For the first time since she had walked in, Malik's expression softened just a little. All right then, he said, turning back to the register. Have a good day, ma'am. Eleanor didn't move for a moment. She knew this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, she wanted to change. Eleanor walked out of the grocery store feeling lighter, but not relieved. The conversation with Malik replayed in her mind, every word cutting deeper than the last. She had spent decades believing she wasn't part of the problem. That racism was something loud and obvious, something only bad people carried in their hearts. But today proved otherwise. She had never shouted slurs or joined hate groups. Yet, with nothing but an assumption, she had turned an innocent man into a suspect. And if Malik hadn't been able to prove himself innocent? If there hadn't been security footage? If the bank manager had called the police instead? Eleanor shuddered at the thought. She had been so certain she was right. But certainty didn't make her just. It made her blind. As she walked home, she noticed things she never had before. The way a black teenager on the bus kept his hands out of his pockets, as if trying to appear less suspicious. The way an older white woman clutched her purse tighter when a young black man passed her on the sidewalk, just like Eleanor had done earlier. The way people glanced at a group of black men laughing on a street corner, not with curiosity but with caution. She saw herself in all of it. For the first time, she saw how deep it ran. When she reached her house, she didn't turn on the TV or distract herself. She sat in the quiet, letting the weight of the day settle in. Malik had been right, an apology wasn't enough. But maybe, just maybe, today was the first step towards something better. Not for Malik. Not for redemption. But because it was the right thing to do. And this time she wouldn't look away.